How do fascist governments take power? This is the question I asked myself before starting my research. Seems like a simple question, but there's much more to it. How are citizens lied to? How is fear used to manipulate people? What role does censorship play? To answer these questions, we first have to look at exactly what fascism is. According to Fascism Anyone by Dr. Lawrence Britt, fascism is a set of characteristics by which falling under a couple of these characteristics does not make a fascist government. However, a collection of them all is what makes it possible to recognize a government as fascist. The 14 points are: 1. Powerful continuing nationalism. 2. Disdain for recognition of human rights. 3. Identification of enemies/scapegoats as a unifying cause. 4. Supremacy of the military. 5. Rampant sexism. 6. Controlled mass media. 7. Obsession with national security. 8. Religion and government are intertwined. 9. Corporate power is protected. 10. Labor power is suppressed. 11. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. 12. Obsession with crime or punishment. 13. Rampant cronyism and corruption. 14. Fraudulent elections. Some particularly effective tactics that fascist regimes use is propaganda and censorship, which can fall under Condition 6, controlled mass media, and Condition 11, disdain for intellectuals and the arts. I'll be going more into depth on censorship and propaganda later in the video. Even now, students like me are experiencing a form of censorship in schools. The American Library Association defines censorship as change in the access and status of material based on the content of the work made by a governing authority or its representatives. Elements such as book banning fall under this definition of censorship. I asked fellow peers who they think should govern what topics students learn about and what materials are to be used, and their thoughts on topics legally being banned from discussion in schools. One peer explains that she believes that the federal government should make decisions on students' learning, and that a majority of topics should be allowed for discussion with parental consent. Another peer believes differently. He believes that those working closest with students, meaning school counselors, advisors, teachers, and state board members, should contribute to the selection of materials, and that legally restricting topics in schools is contradictory to freedom of speech, although sensitive topics should be avoided for younger students. These surveys show that people will always have varied opinions on a topic. However, it is valuable to recognize the experiences and opinions of those living through a form of censorship. Alongside surveying my peers, I also surveyed my mother and grandmother, who both attended secondary school in Cuba, a dictatorship that also used heavy censorship. When asking them what they were not allowed to discuss while in school, I got similar responses, even though they grew up in different generations. They answered that they could not speak illy of the government, Fidel Castro, or the Communist Party. My grandmother also talked about the government being heavily against religion and homosexuality, so they could not discuss that either. However, even with these similar school environments, they had slightly differing opinions when I asked them what their thoughts on censorship overall was. My grandmother believes that all censorship is a violation of freedom of speech, one of the things that make her love this country. Meanwhile, my mother stated that in very few cases, such as protecting young children from adult content and keeping victims' identities in criminal cases safe, censorship is reasonable, but that for the most part, information should be available to everyone so that they can form their own informed opinions. When returning to the conversation of how fascists come to power, experts have identified some conditions for a fascist to take power. According to Fascism Shattered Europe a Century Ago, and Historians Hear Echoes Today in the US by Edward Lempinen, these are: 1. An era of extraordinary instability, loss, and perceived humiliation. 2. In a time of traumatic upheaval, some people seek order at any cost. 3. A strongman appeals to the fear and rage of his public. 4. The leader employs violence to impose and order obedience. 5. The leader identifies scapegoats and attacks them relentlessly. 6. Democratic institutions remove limits on the leader's authority. It's alarming to think that many countries in the world are facing conditions such as these, though not as extreme as those prior to Nazi Germany or Italy under Mussolini. After these conditions are met, it is only easier for someone with fascist ideals and a yearning for power to take over. The 5 stages of fascism, as coined by Robert Paxson and explained in What is Fascism by CFR Education, are: 1. Emerging out of disillusionment. Leaders emerge out of dissatisfaction with the country's current state and capitalize on its unrest. 2. Establishing legitimacy as a political party. Leaders will often use scapegoats, political parties, and military power to establish legitimacy. 3. Gaining power via right-wing partnerships. Fascists partnered with conservatives who were afraid of communism associated with the Socialist Party. 4. Using power to dominate institutions. Leaders in the political party use power to consolidate political authority, such as replacing those like church leaders and removing other political parties. 5. Implementing radical reforms. Nazi Germany is the only example of full radicalization of fascism, where the genocide of millions was ordered. This solidifies the idea that in times of turmoil, it is ever more important to look for the signs of a fascist regime. Looking at what role censorship and propaganda play in fascist leaders rising to power, it becomes clear why it is such a useful tactic. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, in their article, Nazi Propaganda and Censorship, Nazis would control what news appeared on the newspaper, on the radio, and in newsreels. In this way, they could control what information the public saw to shape public opinion. They used these tactics to have German citizens conform to Nazi values and glorify the Nazi Party and its leader, Adolf Hitler. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Nazi censors removed some textbooks from classrooms. New textbooks taught students to obey the Nazi Party, love Hitler, and hate Jews. Nazis used censorship in schools to indoctrinate students into Nazi ideals. Although it is an extreme comparison, this is a reason some people may be against any censorship in schools.